Hello all, this is Sahiti on behalf of Edureka, and I welcome you to this session on UiPath Studio. So in this session, we'll mainly focus on the different components of the UiPath Studio so that you get started with this RPA tool UiPath. So without wasting any further time, let's take a look at the topics for today's session. So we'll start today's session by understanding what is robotic process automation, and then I'll tell you the top tools of the RPA industry. After that, I'll introduce you to the UiPath Studio and then show you how you can install UiPath. Once you understand this installation of UiPath Studio, I'll discuss the different types of projects in UiPath and finally end this session by talking about the components of UiPath Studio through which you can automate various kinds of tasks. Alright, so I hope the agenda is clear to you guys. So now let's get started with the first topic for today's session, that is what is RPA. Now, robotic process automation basically is a process through which robots mimic human actions to perform tasks without any human intervention, right? So whenever a robot mimics human actions to perform a set of tasks by following a sequence of steps without any human intervention is said to be robotic process automation. Now, if I have to break down the terms robotic process and automation for you, then robotic means any entities which mimic human actions. So any entities which mimic human actions are called as robots. Now these entities follow a sequence of steps to perform a task, right? So those sequence of steps are nothing but a process. So any sequence of steps which lead to a meaningful activity are known as a process. And finally, coming to the third term, that is automation. Any process done by a robot without any human intervention is said to be automated. So now if we just combine all these three terms together, that is robotic process and automation, then mimicking human actions to perform a sequence of steps that lead to a meaningful activity without any human intervention is said to be robotic process automation. So the term is really simple, guys. Whenever you want to automate any kind of task, either it be a simple task to a complicated task, maybe you'll have to integrate various environments for it, then you can simply use this technology, that is robotic process automation. So now that you know what robotic process automation is, let me tell you that in the industry of robotic process automation, physical robots do not work. So when you think of the term robotic process automation, the first thing that comes onto mind is that physical robots work, right? Like maybe in a factory, they're helping humans to sort some stuff or maybe perform various kinds of actions. But yes, in this field, it is not the case. In the field of robotic process automation, the process of automation is done with the help of RPA tools. So with that note, let's look into the next topic for today's session, that is RPA tools. So RPA tools are basically softwares through which you can automate various kinds of tasks. So all these softwares have their own advantages and disadvantages. Now there are humongous amount of tools in the industry of RPA, but the top three tools in the market are UiPath, Blue Prism, and Automation Anywhere. So all these three tools have their own functionalities and can be used to automate either a simple or a complex task, either for a particular user or for an enterprise, right? So if you're looking forward to build a career in RPA, then you can definitely move forward and start getting hands-on experience in these tools. Since this session is on UiPath Studio, we'll be focusing on UiPath, right? So with that note, let's get started with the main topic for today's session, that is UiPath Studio. So UiPath Studio is basically a dashboard through which you can automate various kinds of tasks. Now this dashboard has various options that I will talk about later in the session. And all these options can be used to integrate various platforms and then automate different kinds of tasks, either it be Excel, PDF, or maybe you want to automate tasks on an application, or maybe if you want to scrape data, then you can do all kinds of actions like that. So before I move forward and show you how the UiPath Studio looks and how you can get started with automating tasks, let me just tell you the steps to install UiPath. So the steps to install UiPath are as you can see on my screen. Initially, you will have to go to the official website to download either the Enterprise Edition or the Community Edition. Now, UiPath offers both these editions. The Community Edition is the free edition where a user can download that particular edition, practice what he wants, and then once he thinks he gets a hands-on experience on the tool, then he can go forward and download the Enterprise Edition to use it at an enterprise level, right? After that, what you have to do is once you choose which edition that you want to go for, you have to fill in your details like name, email ID, phone number, and so on. And after that, you have to open your registered mail. Now you have to open your registered mail because you'll get a mail saying that thank you for installing UiPath Studio. So let me just open that and show you once. So this is the mail that I had got for that you can download the link. So basically in your mail you get your download link to download the Community Edition. After that, you can just go forward and click on the download link. Once you click on the download link, you'll observe that UiPath is getting downloaded. So once you think that it is downloaded, what you have to do is you have to double click on the downloaded file and the setup will initialize. So once the setup initializes, you'll see a dialog box which will pop up. So over there, you'll have to mention your email address, that is your registered email address, and then you're good to go. So once all these steps are done, you will see that you've installed UiPath Studio, right? So before I move forward and show you how UiPath Studio looks, let me just go to the official website and show you from where you can start installing UiPath. So let me just search for it. Right, so over here, this is basically the UiPath official website on which you have to go. So over here, what you have to do is you have to click on the Start Trial button. And then you'll get two options, that is the Enterprise Edition and the Community Edition. So if you have to choose Community Edition, just click on Community Edition. And then what you'll do is you'll mention your details like, first name, last name, email, and so on, right? Now, once all this is done and then you accept the license agreements, you just have to click on Request Community Edition, and then you'll get the mail that I showed you before. So once you get that mail, you'll have to follow the next steps, right? So I hope the installation part is clear. Now, once UiPath Studio is installed into your system, let me just open and show you how that looks, right? So I'll search for UiPath Studio over here. So let's wait for it to open. So as you can see on my screen, my UiPath Studio dashboard has opened. So now in this session, what I'll do is that, I'll first discuss the projects in UiPath Studio. So there are basically various kinds of projects that you can create in UiPath Studio. So let's discuss each one of them one by one, and then I'll show you in UiPath Studio how you can create a project. So mainly there are 5 kinds of projects that you can create in UiPath Studio. That is the process, library, transactional process, agent process improvement, and robotic enterprise framework. So starting with process. So process is basically used when you want to create a blank project, or maybe you want to design a blank project inside which you wish to add the automation workflow process. So that is when process is used. So whenever you want to create a blank project, remember that you have to use the process type of project. Moving forward, we have the next type of project, that is library. So library is basically used to create reusable components and then publish them together as a library. So what you can do is that maybe you're working in an enterprise, and then maybe you'll have to use a specific amount of components again and again for every kind of automation workflow that you wish to work on, right? So what you can do is that you can create those reusable components, publish them together as a library, and then everybody can use it again in their automation workflows. So irrespective of the fact that which automation workflow they're creating, they can use those particular reusable components in their workflows, right? So libraries can be also added as dependencies to automation processes. So that was about libraries, guys. Now let's move forward with the next type of project, that is transactional process. So transactional process, as the name suggests, is basically used to model a process as a flowchart diagram. So whenever you want to model the automation workflow as a flowchart diagram, you can definitely start by using the transactional process. So what will happen is that when you use this kind of process, you'll have a clear workflow or maybe a complete object diagram of how your process is working and in which step what is happening, right? So it may happen that when you are using UiPath, you may want to automate complex tasks, right? So in such kind of scenarios, you can use this transactional process. Next, let's move forward with the next type of project, that is agent process improvement. The agent process improvement project is basically used when you want to trigger an automation in response to a mouse or a keyboard user event. So whenever you think that a user may have a mouse or a keyboard event and then you want to trigger an automation, then you basically use this kind of process, that is the agent process improvement. And finally, moving forward with the last type of project, that is the robotic enterprise framework. So the robotic enterprise framework is basically used to create transactional business processes that follow the best practices for the large scale deployments. So whenever you think that you're working in an enterprise maybe, and then you have to make sure that it's a large scale deployment, then you can definitely use this robotic enterprise framework kind of projects. So guys, these were the different kinds of projects in UiPath Studio, that is process, library, transactional process, agent process improvement, and robotic enterprise framework. So let's move back to my UiPath Studio and let me just show you how you can create projects. So the first thing that you see when you open UiPath Studio is basically different kinds of projects that you can create on the left hand side, and the projects that are already created or maybe the most recent one on the right hand side of your studio. So over here, as I discussed before, we have 5 kind of projects, and on my right hand side I have various projects that I had created before. Now to create a project, what you have to do is you have to just double click on any of the options. So let's say I want to create a blank process, right? So I'll double click over here, and then let's say we mention the name of the blank process. So let's say I mention sample, and then let the location be the same and description be, let's say, sample project, and then I'll click on create. Now, once you click on create, you'll see that, automatically a project is getting created with the name sample, right? So let's just wait for that to happen. So as you can see on my screen, guys, our project is created with the name samples. So this is basically how you can create a blank process or any kind of project that you wish to. Now over here, when you open your project, you'll clearly see that, you have various kinds of options in the UiPath Studio dashboard. So next in this session on UiPath Studio, I'm going to discuss the various components of UiPath Studio. So starting with the main components, there are mainly 4 components that you need to understand about. That is the ribbon pane, activity pane, output pane, and the properties pane. So these are mainly the 4 panes that you need to understand about in the UiPath Studio. So don't worry, we'll be discussing each one of them one by one. So we'll start with the ribbon pane components. So in the ribbon pane components, there are mainly 3 tabs if you observe. So over here, that's the start, design, and execute. All these 3 tabs have their own options. So we'll discuss each of these tabs one by one so that we get a good understanding about the various options in UiPath. So starting with the Start tab, when you click on the Start tab, you'll be redirected to the screen where you have various options to create projects and your recent projects. So if I just click and show you, you'll clearly see that, you'll be redirected to this particular screen. So that was about the Start tab. So Start tab is basically to redirect you to the starting point where you can either create a new automation workflow, or maybe if you wish to open a recent project, then you can do that, right? So that was about the Start. Now moving on to the Design tab. So the design tab has various options, as you can see on my screen, like, file, edit, dependencies, wizards, and so on. So we'll discuss each one of them. So starting with file. So the file tab in the design section is basically used to either create, save, and execute the project files. So basically you can use to, create a new main XML file and then either save the existing file, or maybe you can save the file as a template and then also execute your project. Moving on to the edit option. The edit option is basically used to cut, copy, paste the activities in your automation workflow. So whenever you drag and drop few activities in your automation workflow, and maybe you just want to cut some activity, copy it, and then paste it somewhere else, then you can definitely do that by using this particular option. The next option that we have is manage packages. So the manage packages option is basically used to install various packages required for your automation workflow. So don't worry, I'll show you how that can be done. Moving forward, we have the wizards tab, which have various options for recording. So the recording option is basically used to record actions on either the desktop environments or on the virtual environment. Maybe if you just want to record few actions, and then if you wish to store that particular recorded actions into your automation workflow, then you can use this option of recording. Moving forward, we have the screen scraping and the data scraping wizards. So as the name suggests, the screen scraping and the data scraping wizards are basically used to scrape data from various platforms, either it be a web page or maybe an Excel file, to any kind of application. Now to scrape data, these wizards mainly use the OCR technologies. After that, in the wizards tab, we also have the user events. Now these user events are basically used to capture keyboard and mouse events. So whenever you have a user clicking something, or maybe just clicking on enter or spacebar or maybe tab or any kind of keyboard event that happens, or user event, you can use this particular option to capture that particular event. After that, we have the selectors tab. So the selectors tab has the UI explorer. So that is basically used to play around with the selectors and then validate them. So for example, if you perform some action on any web page, and then automatically few selectors will be stored into your automation workflow, right? Now you can click on this UI explorer and then you can make sure what kind of selectors that you wish to choose. After that, we have the next section, that is variables. So in the variables section, we have remove unused variables. Now, in an automation, it may happen that you might create more number of variables than you require, right? You can just remove all the unused variables to just avoid any kind of confusion. After that, we have the export option. The export option is basically used to export the workflow to Excel. So whenever you want to export your data or maybe workflow to Excel, you can definitely do that. And finally, coming to the deploy section, which has the publish options. So the publish option is basically used to publish the project to deploy it in the orchestrator server. So when it is deployed into the orchestrator server, then that particular project can be implemented on thousands of computers or thousands of PCs, either to automate the front office processes or to automate the back office processes. So let me just shift back to my UiPath Studio and just show you the ribbon tab. So guys, this is the design section, which has these options that I just discussed. So if you click on new, you can clearly see that, you get various options like, sequence, flowchart, state machine, and global handler. So sequence is basically to add a new sequence. Flowchart is to create a new flowchart. State machine is to create a state machine kind of process and so on. After that, we have saved. We can either save all the files that we have open, or we can just save a specific file with a specific name. Now in the save as template option, we can basically save a project as a template and then execute it. Now, as I was talking about the manage packages option, so let me just open this and show you. So in the manage packages options, when you click on it, you'll clearly see that, first option is project dependencies. So over here, you have all the project dependencies that are used for this particular project. Now, maybe it may happen that, you want to install more dependencies, right? So for that, what you can do is you can either go to all packages where you have n number of dependencies which can be installed, or you can go to official, which have all the official packages. So here, if I just search for UiPath, you can clearly see that, it has so many activities. So you can just install them based on how you want to do. So for example, let's say I want to install the FTP activity. So I'll just click on this arrow and then click on save, and then you'll see that, all the dependencies are getting installed and then all are getting restored, right? So let's just wait for that to happen. So once it is installed, you can clearly see that, you've been redirected to your dashboard. So that's how basically you can use manage packages option to install various kinds of packages. The recording option has various options like basic, desktop, web, image, and native Citrix. So all these recording options can be used to record various kind of actions either on the desktop environments or on web, or maybe on an application, or maybe on a virtual environment or on the Citrix environment. So you can use basic to record PC actions. Desktop is again used to record, actions happening on an application on the desktop, or maybe the user or the mouse events. The web is used to record actions on the websites. The image is used to record actions on basically the virtual environment. And similarly, the native Citrix option is used to record actions on Citrix environments. So that's how you can use the recording option. Coming to screen scraping and data scraping. So if you click on the screen scraping option, you'll see that, the screen will get scraped. So whatever screen that you wish to get scraped, you can just click over that. You can just drag and click over here, and then you'll be redirected to this particular option where, you can just choose whatever scraping method that you want, either full text, native, or OCR, and then click on finish, right? So I'm just going to close this part because I don't want to save it. So since over there I was talking about full text, native, or OCR, what I meant by that is full text will only basically extract all the text present in the area that you mentioned. The OCR will also extract text from basically the images present in that particular area, and native is to extract data from the Citrix environment. So that was about screen scraping. So coming to user events, you can just use this option of user events either on click element, on key press element, on click image, monitor mouse, or monitor keyboard. So that was about user event, guys. Moving forward, we have UI Explorer. As I told you before, it plays around with selectors. Same goes with variables. Variables are used to remove unused variables. This is used to export workflow to the Excel file, and this is used to publish. So that was about the design tab, guys. Now let's talk about the third tab of the ribbon pane, that is the execute tab. So the execute tab has mainly three options. That is the launch option, debug option, and the logs option. So talking about the launch option first, the launch option basically has again three options, that is the run, stop, and debug. So the run option is basically used to execute your project. The stop option is used to stop the execution of your project, and the debug option is used to start debugging the project. So there's a difference between run and debugging your project. What happens in run is that, you just execute it, and then finally you come to know whether there's an error or not. So if there's an error, the execution stops midway and sees that, XYZ is the error. But if you choose the debug option, what happens is that each and every step is executed. So the debug option will basically take more time for execution than the run option. So that was about the launch section, guys. Let's move forward with the next section, that is the debug section. So the debug section basically has 5 options, that is the step into, step over, validate, breakpoint, slow step, and options. Talking about step into, step over, so the steps are used to check the step-by-step execution. For example, let's say, we have a complicated workflow, and then you want to check the step-by-step execution to understand where it is going wrong, then you can use this particular option. Apart from this, we also have the validate option. So the validate option is basically used to validate your project. After the validate option, we have the breakpoints. So the breakpoints are basically used to define a breakpoint while debugging the project. So maybe you want to define a breakpoint so that you understand, or you want to stop your execution right there, and then maybe you wish to check something, or maybe if you wish to change something, you can definitely do that by using breakpoints. After that, we have the slow step option. So the slow step option is basically used to reduce the speed of execution. And finally, we have options. So options basically offers various kinds of options to highlight a few tasks. So that was about the debug section, guys. Now let's move forward and see the final section, that is logs. So the logs basically have only one option, that is, the open logs option. So the open logs option are used to open the execution logs of the project, right? So basically, if you have any error, then you can also go back and check in the logs where you're facing the errors. So now let me just shift back to my UiPath Studio and show you these options. So as you can see on my screen, these are the various options, that is the launch, debug, and logs. Now, apart from that, if you wish to know more about how you can use these options, then you can refer to my session on error handling in UiPath, where I've talked in detail of how you can use various activities and these options to debug your projects. So that was about the ribbon tab, guys. So with this, we come to an end to the components of ribbon tab. Now let's move forward and discuss the next pane, that is the activity pane. So the activity pane also has various components. So that is mainly app integration, orchestrator, programming, system, UI automation, user events, workflow. So all these 7 components are present in the activity pane. Now, before I move forward and talk about these options, let me just tell you that activity pane is one of the main panes of the UiPath Studio. That is because it has all the activities that are required to automate a workflow. So in UiPath Studio, you don't have to write anything, or you don't have to sit and code anything. You just have to drag and drop activities to perform any kind of task. So for example, let's say you want to play around with a for loop, right? So you want to run a loop, and that is a for loop that you wish to. So you don't have to sit and program it. You can just drag and drop the for loop activity from the activity pane, and then you're good to go, right? So the components that you can see on my screen are basically the headlines of various activities present in the UiPath Studio. So let me just shift back to my UiPath Studio and show you. So as you can see on my screen, these are the components that are present, that is app integration, orchestrator, programming, system, UI automation, user events, and workflow. So if I just click on app integration, you have various options to integrate apps like, CSV, Excel, FTP, mail, and so on. After that, in the orchestrator part, we have various options like alerts, API, assets, job, processes, and queues. So basically, these options will again have various activities beneath them. After that, coming to programming. So the programming option will basically have collection, data table, debug, execute, generic values, and string. So over here, you can either create a data table, or add a row, delete a row. Maybe you can add a collection, delete a collection, and then debug something, and so on. In the system option, you have various options for like application, clipboard, dialog, environment, file, PowerShell, and VB script. So in the application, you have close application, open application, and so on. So basically, activity pane is really simple, guys. It has various options for different kinds of activities. Now coming to UI automation, you have various options like browser, element, image, OCR, text, window. Coming to user events, the user events has various options like element trigger, image trigger, system trigger, and so on. And coming to workflow, the workflow has various options like flow chart, checkpoint, control, error handling, and so on. So basically, these are various options that you have in activity pane, and beneath them also there are various activities present. So you can drag and drop any activity based on whatever your need is. For example, let's say I want to drag and drop a flow chart. I can just drag and drop it into my screen, and then I can start using it. So that was about the activity pane, guys. Now let's move forward with the next pane, that is the properties pane. So every activity will have its own properties, right? For example, let's say in the flowchart activity, if I search for an assign activity and then drag and drop it over here. Now this particular assign activity will have its own properties, that is the to section and the value section, and the flowchart itself will also have its own properties, right? So to configure properties of each and every activity separately, and then make sure that there's a coordination between all the activities in the automation workflow, we can use this properties section. So that was about the properties section, guys. Now let's move forward with the final pane of this dashboard, that is the output pane. So the output pane, as the name suggests, is basically used to view the output of your automation workflow. So once you execute your project, what you'll see that the sample project has started executing. And once you see that it has executed, you'll see a final message saying that sample project has been executed, right? So basically that's how you can use the output pane. Now the output pane also shows the compatibility of various packages, maybe project dependencies, also shows where are the breakpoints, and so on, right? So that was about output pane, guys. So the output pane is basically used to just view the output of your automation workflow. So guys, that was about the different panes in UiPath Studio. I hope you've understood what are the different panes in UiPath Studio. So let me just show you how you can drag and drop activities in the UiPath Studio and how you can use them so that you understand and get started with UiPath, right? So let's say we want to find out whether a number is even or odd. So what will be the condition for it? So first what we'll do is basically we'll get the numbers to be entered. Let's say the first number is 596. We know that's even, so let's just prove that it's even, and the second number we'll put in 2. Now what we'll do is that we'll divide first number by second number. If the remainder is 0, then that means it's an even number, but if the remainder is 1, then that means it's an odd number, right? So let's just do the same. So I'll just use the flowchart that was initially there. Now what I'll do is that I'll drag a sequence. So sequence is basically to put in all the automation steps into one flow, right? So I can just either rename the sequence also, let's say finding even number. After that, what I'll do is I'll double click over here and then I'll start dragging and dropping the activities. Now initially what I said was that I wanted to input a number, right? So to input a number, you'll have to ask the user for the number, right? So for that, you'll drag and drop the input dialog option, and then you'll mention the title. So let's say first number, and let's say in the label I'll mention the number. Now what I'll do is I'll store the output of this particular input dialog in a variable. So for that, I'll create a variable. So to create a variable, what I have to do is I can either right click over here and choose the option of create variable, or I can either use the keyboard shortcut Control K and then mention the variable's name. So let's say I mention the variable's name to be number 1. Now after that, I'll again drag and drop an input dialog, and let's say we mention the title to be second number, and let's say we mention the text label to be again mention the number, right? So over here again I'll create a variable. So for that, I'm pressing on Control K and then I'll mention the variable name, let's say number 2, right? You can just check your variables in the variables pane. So as you can see, my variable type is generic, so I'll just change that to int. So when you click over here, you'll see the most popular used variable types. So over here I've got various options, but yes, I'm clicking on int because my number is of integer type, right? After that, what I'll do is I'll drag and drop an if else loop. So I'll search for if, drag and drop it over here, and then what I'll do is I'll mention the condition. So let's say I mention number 1 mod number 2 equal to 0. So what I'm doing is that if number 1 divided by number 2 gives a remainder 0, then we'll say that it's an even number, else we'll display that it's an odd number, right? Now once you mention the condition, let's say we want to just display the output. So for that, what I'll do is I'll search for a message box, drag and drop it over here, and let's say I mention the text number is even, and let's say if it is not even, then we want to display the message number is odd. So I'll just mention number is odd. So now I'll go back to my flowchart, and then what I'll do is I'll connect the starting point of the flowchart to the sequence, and then I'll just execute this particular project. So let's say we mentioned the first number to be 596. So we'll just click on OK after that, and we'll mention the second number, let's say 2. Click on OK, and then we'll see the message that number is even. Now similarly, if you just want to execute again, let's say we want to enter an odd number. So let's just do the same. So let's check for odd number. Let's say I mentioned 679. Click on OK, and then I'll mention 2. Click on OK again, and then you'll see that the number is odd. So guys, that's how basically you can use UiPath Studio. So instead of run over here, you can also have clicked on debug, and then you would see step-by-step execution. So this was a simple project on UiPath Studio. This was just an introductory session of how you can use UiPath Studio or how you can get started with UiPath Studio. Now, if you want to learn more about UiPath Studio and if you want to practice complex projects related to UiPath Studio, then you can refer to my session on RPA projects, which has detailed hands-on on various projects in UiPath Studio. Now, before I end this session on UiPath Studio, let me just go back to the documents of my system, and then I'll show you something interesting over there. So if you go to the documents of your system, you'll have a folder known as UiPath. So in the folder of UiPath, you'll see various project files, right? So these are all the projects that I have created till date. Now, for example, let's say we go to the sample project that we just created. You'll see mainly 2 files in that. That is the main file and the project.json file. The main file is basically your UiPath automation workflow, and the project.json file contains all the information about your project. So if I just open it with my Notepad++, you'll see that, it has the name, the description, the main, that is basically what is the name of the main file, and then the dependencies also. So it has all the version names, the dependency files, the name of your project, and all other related information, right? So any day, if you wish to just understand the configuration of your projects that you created for UiPath Studio, then you can go back to your project.json file and understand what are the dependencies present for your project, what is the name, and maybe what is the version, and so on. So guys, that was about UiPath Studio. Now UiPath also has various other components like UI Robot and UiPath Orchestrator. Now talking about the connection between all these three components, the basic connection is that whatever automation workflow you create in UiPath Studio is executed by the UI Robot. And then once you execute it, you can deploy that particular automation workflow and publish that project in the Orchestrator server, so that through Orchestrator server, hundreds of PCs can automate either the front office processes or the back office processes. So guys, with this, we come to an end of this session on UiPath Studio. I hope you found this session informative. So if you have any further queries related to the session, please comment in the comment section below. Until then, that's all from my side today. Thank you and happy learning.